Well, I think in China there is now for the first time a full-blown debate about the future directions of its own North Korean policy. In the past it has broadly supported the regime, but now there are two or three factors lining up which are causing, I think, a fairly deep Chinese rethink. Number one is that North Korea's nuclear weapons program is causing US allies in the region, not just South Korea and the United States, but also Japan and others, to increase their ballistic missile defense cooperation to protect against any future North Korean attack. Of course, that has implications for broader Chinese security interests in East Asia. Number two is the Chinese are deeply concerned that if there is a provocation from the North, like we've seen in recent years, including, for example, that most recent bombardment of a South Korean island, that the probability of a retaliatory action by the South Korean government is now very high, and the prospects of escalation are large, and there's no real Chinese plan B for that. And the final point, I think, which we should all bear in mind is being linked to North Korea, frankly, doesn't do your global reputation a whole lot of good in the foreign policy stakes. That's what's driving, I think, a Chinese rethink as we speak. China wants to improve its global foreign policy reputation. Just doesn't want to just be a great power. It wants to be a great power which is respected. But then when you find yourself in the foreign policy field supporting North Koreans and siding with Russia on the question of the Syrian debate in the UN Security Council, then frankly it starts to eat away at that credibility. So that's one of the reasons also why there's a rethink. And I think this creates an opportunity for a fresh strategic dialogue between China and the United States about how we prevent the core question from happening. That is, the North Koreans moving across that line in terms of their nuclear capabilities. Well, the big debate in China at present, which is why there's so much concern about North Korea as a serious strategic distraction, is how do you actually transform the Chinese domestic economic growth model? This is Chinese priority, public policy priority number 1, 2 and 3. Because, as you've rightly identified, the growth rate is slowing, but you still have a whole lot of people who need jobs, you've still got to raise living standards, you've got massive expectations in the Chinese people. So moving that growth model to the new one based on high levels of consumption, lower levels of state investment, the expansion of the services sectors, particularly in China's second and third tier cities, and critically creating more market space for the Chinese private sector, that's where the priorities lie. And the challenge for Li Keqiang and the new leadership under Xi Jinping is to implement that blueprint. That's why these strategic distractions, frankly, and threats to regional stability and security are so deeply unwanted in Beijing, because it undermines their ability to get on with the economic business.